Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Dear Grower Let's Work with Vendors webinar. I'm Janine Wright, Senior Communications Specialist for Prospiant, and I'll be your moderator today. We're excited to have you with us and excited for the presentation today to hear from everybody. Before we dive in, I just want to mention this webinar is part of a bigger Dear Grower webinar series where we're taking you through every step of building a greenhouse from start to finish and talking about the things that you need to know to work with the designers, the builders, the suppliers. So today's presentation, it's all about vendors and how best to work with them. And we'll take a break in December from the Dear Grower webinars, but we'll be back on January 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for the next Dear Grower webinar, which is Let's Get This Greenhouse Operational. So you can sign up for that on Bright Talk, or you can watch for an email from us in a few weeks that'll have some registration information. So for today's session, we'll hold all the audience questions until the last 15 minutes, but we'd encourage you to enter them anytime during the presentation into the question box, and then we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So I'm excited to welcome today's presenters. Keith Bemerer, of Prospiant, Inside Sales Coordinator of Prospiant, is going to kind of be leading the conversation. And he's joined by Dennis Raath of Lock Drives, Patricia Dean of Wadsworth Control Systems, and Scott Fenlon from Plaskolite. So they'll be taking us from today's topic, and I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. So Keith, I'll turn the time over to you, and then I'll be back for the Q&A session at the end.
Awesome. Thanks, Janine. Appreciate it. Well, welcome, everybody. This is the fourth in our series. We've had several talks on from different people, from owners of greenhouses to the designers to the actual project managers to make it happen. But one of the very big key elements to making any greenhouse is our vendors. And our vendors are very important, and we work with them on a daily basis. And so with that, we invited three of them, good friends of mine, three people that I interact with almost daily, that really help make the greenhouse happen. And so if you guys don't mind, I'll start Patricia, if you don't mind. You introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Dennis, and we'll go to Scott. So
great. Well, thank you. And yeah, thanks for having us on. So I'm Patricia Dean. I'm the CEO of Wadsworth Controls. We've been in business since 1952, and Prospiant is one of our very best customers, and we really enjoy working with them. We have three product lines. We do environmental controls, everything from simple controls to very advanced controls. We do energy curtains and the drive units to operate the curtains, including opening and closing the vents.
Awesome. Dennis?
I'm Dennis Raath. I'm with Lock Drives. I'm the National American Sales Manager for the Horticultural Division. We've been in business 178 years. We're based out of Germany. We do everything lifting in the horticultural industry. We also work in the ag, architectural, and aeronautical industry for lifting equipment. And thank you for inviting us, Keith.
No problem. And finally, Scott.
Hey, Keith, thanks for the invite. Scott Fenlon. I work for Plaskolite Inside Sales. You may know us better as Plaskolite Polygal. We've been extruding multi-wall polycarbonate since 1970s or so. We offer a variety of polycarbonate extrusions for greenhouse glazing applications. And we produce right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Majority of what goes into your greenhouses. So we're happy to be a part of this.
Awesome. And that's where I'm going to start. Let's start with glazing, because glazing is greenhouses. You don't have a greenhouse without the glazing. And, you brought it up that you have the multi-wall polycarbonate, which is probably used on 97.8% of every greenhouse built out there. So tell us a little bit more about polycarbonate, what it is. It goes by so many different names. I always hear 8 millimeter. I hear polycarbonate. People call it acrylic sometimes when it's technically not. And then I also hear Lexan, which is actually a GE name. It depends on the generation of who you talk to, what they name the multi-wall. But explain to people what exactly is polycarbonate. Why is it important, and why is such a popular glazing aspect to a greenhouse?
Yeah, of course. So it starts off as a polycarbonate resin. We extrude that on our line. It becomes a multi-wall polycarbonate sheet. It's lightweight. It's very heavy duty, easy to work with. It's UV protected on one side. So obviously with a greenhouse, you're going to have an exterior application. So it's going to be protected from UV. It's not going to yellow and get brittle over time. It has a 15-year limited warranty. So it's very durable, lightweight material to work with. And it's going to let a lot of light in. So our clear multi-wall sheet lets in about almost 80% light transmission. That 8mm twin wall, some people refer to it as multi-wall. Like Keith said, it has a number of names that it can be referred to in the industry.
So is there any new advancements? I mean, a lot of people don't know about diffused, and you can do 2UV if you have different style structures. And you can do different colors, depending on your application, like opal or white, as some people call it.
That is correct. So we do offer 2UV. We have that capability. Light diffusion, 100% light diffusion, temperature reduction. As far as like new advancements, we haven't really, maybe in the last 5 or 10 years, improved upon the diffusion or the temperature reduction. Those are kind of been our bread and butter, but we always do have R&D in the works. And with the acquisition of Plaskolite, that's kind of expanded our horizon as to what we can do and possibly put out in the future.
Yeah, that's important. And that it's huge. I mean, the glazing, people don't realize how important it truly is, and stuff until, you're heating or, you're trying to cool and stuff like that. So it's big. And I mean, and that kind of leads into Dennis and Patricia with with motors and stuff like that. So Dennis, I mean, what a lot of people just, when they hear greenhouse motors, they really don't know it actually is a gearbox. It's what opens and closes a physical vent or a curtain or something like that. So what's the important aspects of like what kind of motors you use in a greenhouse are?
Okay, so generally a lot of times where you'll run into issues in renovation, and Patricia will attest to this, is when somebody converts a greenhouse to cannabis facility and they have triple blackout screen and they're just using a regular motor and it doesn't work normally because you've got more weight. So it's best to make sure you do all your calculations correctly and educate the customer that they need to review all of that before you just say, "Hey, I need a motor." It's very crucial that you get all the correct information so you can calculate that.
Yeah, and it's important too. I mean, we talked about this when we were talking with the owner, when we were talking to Diefenbacher, is that knowing your correct voltages, what phase of electricity and stuff. And I mean, how many times you guys probably have like getting so irritated that somebody doesn't know their voltages on the first try or what phase electric they've got, because it can really mess things up later, especially when you get into control systems. But knowing like, if you've got 150 or 120, 240, one phase, three phase, it's very important for control aspects. And I mean, it's the other part of that too is limit switches. And so we can get into that. A lot of people, I think, don't really know about limits, what it does, what actually, what's the importance behind it and stuff like that. If either, even Patricia, you want to start with that one? Like what's the importance of limits,
So first I want to apologize because I'm at a hotel and they're on a little break in the room next door. So maybe Dennis wants to talk about that for a second.
So limit switch is very crucial because the limit switch is there, acts as a safety device so you don't overrun your motor and you don't get damage in the greenhouse. So when a limit switch is not wired correctly, because sometimes maintenance or the electrician is not familiar and they don't want to ask for help because they think they can do it, and it's best to try and educate them that they do understand on how the limit switch does work. So wiring it correctly is very important because that can save you a lot of headaches, a lot of damage, especially in the wintertime when you have an issue and you don't want to crack your glass or bring in your vent because it wasn't you bypassed your safety. So that's important. That's why you have a limit switch there.
And what it does is it limits opening and closing, how far it can open, how far it can close, correct?
Yeah. So when you're taking, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, super. So when you're looking at a roof vent, say, or any vent, you want them to time it and get it so that it's closed, so you don't have any leakage. And so that's your close limit. And then the open limit determines how far the vent will open. So for example, I was at a greenhouse yesterday and they weren't open very far and he wasn't getting a lot of airflow. And we said, well, you can open it to about here. And you have that open limit, and all of us have that. And that's very important. And so like for our controls, because the motors, the drive units don't usually have potentiometers. And so they operate based on time. So I was in the greenhouse playing around with it, timing it, getting things set up. So let's say the control thought it was supposed to be open and I had it like halfway open. The control is going to run it every so often. You can program it however you want. And so it's going to run it until it gets open. And what that does is it allows the position of the vent to reset. If the limit isn't set, it could risk running off the rack, which I have seen. And that's when we get to go running full speed back to the control box. But those limits are extremely important. And usually once they get set, you don't need to do it again unless, like in the instance I was discussing, you want to adjust that. So they are very important. And Keith, absolutely, getting the right size, as Dennis said, making sure you have the right power, that's really challenging.
Yeah, it's very challenging. And I mean, overall, what we're trying to do here is heat and cool a greenhouse. Primarily now we're in wintertime, we're trying to heat, and stuff like that, which is big thing is starting to come up as R value in greenhouses and stuff like that. There's different codes and regulations that all manufacturers need to follow and stuff like that. And even states are starting to pass certain regulations on what you can do for glazing options and stuff like that. So going back to you, Scott, what kind of R value do you see in multi-wall polycarbonate? I mean, I know there's different types, different sizes and stuff like that, but explain kind of R value, what's the importance and stuff like that.
So R value refers to the installation value of the product. So actually I'm going to pull up, I have a data sheet, so I'm going to reference that. So 32 millimeter, obviously you're not going to put that in a greenhouse. That's going to be the highest R value that we do offer. But our 8 millimeter clear offers an R value of about 1.66. So that's compared to the 32 millimeter is a 5.55. So it's not as good as our thickest sheet, but it's still fairly decent amount of R value, better than what you would be getting with maybe a poly film or something thinner like a corrugated sheet. So multi-wall is going to give you some R value, better R value compared to like a film. Or
now, this is a good question because people might ask this over time. Is like, does the R value actually deplete as it ages a multi-wall?
That I do not know. I would I'd have to ask our technical team. I haven't heard of it depleting or what the rate would be if it does. I mean, I know it does yellow over time, but again, we have a 15-year warranty on that, so it would be a long time before that would happen. But,
and that's usually when it yellows, it's UV degradation, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. So that's going to be over a long period of time for that to happen. So exterior forces and stuff, because it's interesting. I mean, I'll go into greenhouses and I'll ask them. I mean, they'll be completely yellow, and you'll say, "Well, how long you had it on there?" I think I replaced that like 22 years ago, and then you look up. And I call it starry night. If you're in there, you can see all the holes through and stuff like that. Where you're past its prime. But literally, if a baseball or a leaf drops on it, the whole roof is going to come through because how brittle it is. Yeah. But it's important. I mean, it gets to a certain point, age, it's time to replace and stuff like that. So definitely, and I've heard, depending on where you're at, how much sun you're getting, I've heard of 25 years before someone's had to reglaze. So it can last a really long time depending on how much sun it's actually getting throughout the year.
I tend to see more like, it seems like roofs deteriorate faster compared to say sidewalls and stuff. Because I see a lot of sidewalls that are in there for many years with even little yellowing, even though it might be in full face of sun. But the roof, I mean, lot of people don't realize it takes the elements. I mean, snow, wind, rain, hail, the whole 9 yards. And depending on what area of the country you're in, it's huge. I mean, you can, Patricia, you're out in Colorado, you guys get hail. I mean, here we hardly ever get hail, and stuff like that. But hail is super detrimental to a greenhouse roof. It's like the last thing anybody wants to see.
And another thing I wanted to maybe mention, so Dennis and I are both on the board for the National Greenhouse Manufacturers Association. And so the codes and standards that we're starting to see for energy efficiency are really focusing in on the R value and, having energy curtains, having LED lights. So we're starting to see a lot more requirements. So that's something that growers are going to want to be aware of and maybe get their local association involved, because they haven't really been adopted in all of the areas, but it's something that could really impact the cost of your greenhouse.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, California, number one, they're huge. They want dual glazing systems. And polycarbonate and inflated poly are fine, but glass is not. You'd have to have a dual glass system. And most people don't have extrusions for dual glass systems yet. It's unheard of because of the cost, because everybody's trying to get such a low cost. But it's that whole thing, energy value, it's just going to start spreading as time goes on. So, but the other thing that leads into, for you, Patricia, is energy curtains. I mean, explain to people what energy curtains are, what their dual functionality is, and actually what it does.
Sure. So an energy curtain typically goes across the top. So if this is the peak of your greenhouse, obviously different shapes, and here's your truss, the energy curtain's either going to be flat across here or slope across. So you still have room for your lights, your unit heaters, your basket systems underneath that curtain system. So what it does is at night, it's going to cover, and we've got outdoor sensors, so it's not going to cover if it's a warm night, but it's going to cover at night if it's cold. And that reduces the area that needs to be heated. And it can save about 40 to 50% on your energy consumption at night, which is when 80% of the heating occurs since the sun is down. So that's its first job. And then in the morning, it can evaluate, and this is where the control really comes in. Some of our controls are just going to uncover it in the morning. It could be a blizzard outside. Other controls, or newer controls, can look and say, what's the light level, what's the temperature, what's the humidity, what's going on out there before you uncover it. Because as soon as you uncover it, that cold air from above, it can be 30 degrees and it comes down, and that's going to really, diminish your heat retention. So if it's a cold day, you want to leave it covered. So let's say it's a nice day. It uncovers slowly because you can get that warm air hitting up, and you just want to really mix that cold air so that you don't get plant shock. So it's uncovering. So it's a nice day. And then let's say it gets hot. So now it's going to cover the curtain for cooling. And that's going to depend if you have roof vents. Do you want a little bit of a crack in there? How are you? So there's a lot of different parameters. And the smarter the control, the better we're able to maximize the ROI on that curtain. And then the other thing it can do is it can shade. So if you have a light sensitive crop that doesn't like a lot of light, then you get into blackouts. So you've got obviously mums, the traditional poinsettias you've got in the background, cannabis, all those short day crops. So those are blackout curtains. And then now we have a lot of places like where I live that have dark sky ordinances. And so if you're a grower and you're using your lights at night, you need to close them off because they don't want it polluting the night sky. And my colleague Amanda was flying over the northern part of the US, and she could just see a glow from Canada from the greenhouses. Yeah. So it's a real thing. So those are some of the different, and then you can have them on the sides, but traditionally it's just on the top. And there's a cool tool. It's a little bit dated, but it's called the virtual grower. And you can build a greenhouse model wherever you are. Say it's a Prospiant vale, and it's got this type of glazing. It's got an energy curtain. This is the type of heating, and it'll do a heat calculator and tell you about what it's going to cost. And you tell it what type of plant you're growing, and you can build one with a curtain and one without. And it's based on, the climate science and just, the known data around energy savings from curtains. So it's a great tool.
And are you seeing specific, are you seeing more of one type of curtain in a greenhouse than another? Or are you starting to see something coming up from something newer style? I mean, are you seeing energy curtains more, or are you seeing shade curtains more?
Well, I think it really depends on the part of the country. So like right now I'm up here in New England, they absolutely are going to do, an energy curtain, whereas like Dennis, where you are, maybe you see more shade curtains because it's a more mild climate. And so you want an open weave. And, like with your covering, they've got light diffuse because, we have a lot of equipment in the top of our greenhouses in this country. And so that light diffusion really helps minimize all those shadows and things. So,
Right.
and I mean, ideally, I think if a grower could, they'd love to have dual curtains. I want this, and you really can play with it a lot more. But it's it's a significant cost savings. But there are a lot of grants out there.
Yeah,
that can
and
help.
you're
offset that
100%
cost.
right on you're starting to see it's funny because 8 years ago when they start the big vegetable ranges up and everybody was using supplemental lighting at night and it was all pink and red. I remember, Dennis, you might remember this too, but there was a range in Virginia and they turned the lights on for the first time and the fire department got 35 phone calls that night because they thought something was on fire because nobody knew. Like it was so new, but like it was crazy that they said that the fire department finally just said, we know what it is, don't worry about it. But that really started the whole reason for having to black out, areas because of the light. They technically call it light pollution. It's kind of funny to hear the word light pollution, but that it's becoming a thing now, especially on these vegetable ranges in certain areas of Colorado. So
we first had a request. Someone said, we want to see the blackout system from outside the greenhouse. And I'm like, what, why? But on our website, we have that. And it says, we're not afraid of the dark. But, historically, it was people wanting to make sure light wasn't getting in. But yeah, so we can show, hey, there are lights on. Now this curtain is covered and the lights are.
And that's important too, because Scott, there's actually a polycarbonate out there called white.
Yes.
You can't even see through it. I mean, it looks white on the outside, but technically you can't even. There's no light transmission at all.
Yeah, 0% light transmission, completely opaque. And people will ask for opaque. Sometimes they don't mean completely opaque. Sometimes they do. But that's the one you want to go with if you don't want anyone looking in or complete light deprivation. Your white's the way to go.
Yeah, or I've seen bronze. Some people put, if they want just a little bit, but they want, bronze just for security purposes too, stuff like that. Because security is starting to get huge in greenhouses. The old adagio is just, you can easily break into any greenhouse, but you really don't want. You're trying to prevent it now. It's kind of getting worse, but that's one way is using something like that to essentially keep the eyes out of your greenhouse and stuff like that. People are looking for tips and tricks, growing stuff, I guess. But yeah. So Dennis, on a series of controls. What are you seeing? Like what is some of the things that people are asking for in controls or especially motors? What are something new that it's starting to bring over from Europe, I guess you could say.
So new item for us has been an electronic limit switch, which is very useful for the maintenance or for the person that takes care of the equipment, because sometimes at a greenhouse facility they wear many hats. So they're not just the maintenance guy; they might be the owner, and they might be the grower as well.
So explain the limits for people that might not.
So the limit switch is something that you set on the motor to control the travel of the motor when it's opening the vent, or the push-pull system on a shade system. And you stop it when you need to stop it at a certain distance or certain opening. And that normally has to be done manually with a set screw, with a screwdriver or an Allen key. So when you got electronic limit, you just set it with your fingers, 3 fingers, push start, open, stop it, and then close it and stop it and double check it, and you set. But that goes back to installing it correctly with the wiring. Make sure you don't bypass the safety. So on our limit, everything is set. So there's no mistakes when they do the installation. It works.
Yeah, so I usually explain to people, like a lot of people like the old mechanical, which you were explaining, and then versus the electronic limits. I usually tell people it's like a garage door opener for those that install their own garage door opener in their home. The old ones were mechanical limits. You had to pray and hope that it would land right where you want to. But with the new ones, you can kind of go up and down as you want, get it to where you want it, lock it in, go the opposite direction, lock it in. So you might, a person being up on a lift or a ladder might only be there for, 2-3 minutes compared to maybe 20-25, and you've got 15 motors to do. It's a time cutter and stuff like that. So it's, these electronic limits as they come over, it's a game changer. And, as people who are maintenance people in greenhouses, ones that are, out there greasing, fixing things and stuff like that, that it's less time consuming. Safety is becoming a huge thing in greenhouses, especially with installs and stuff like that. So that kind of go ahead.
And then the other thing is we put VFDs on the motors, which help. And Patricia is a big advocate of supplying VFDs on equipment in the greenhouse.
And explain what that is.
Frequency drive. It increases the frequency on startup and slows it down. And then when you close it, it speeds it up, and then it slows it down just before you close. So it changes the RPMs of the motor.
And what typical is that? Is it like going from like a 3 to a 5 or a 5 to 8?
No, it might go higher. Depends on your motor. It could go up to 30 RPMs, but then it will close you down. So especially on an open roof house.
Yeah. So if you think of, like your atrium, so it's like this. And so it's a lot of work pushing that up, right? So you need, Locke does a great job. So you get a big, strong motor. It doesn't need to go very fast when it's opening. But let's say a storm starts coming in. You want to close it, but you don't want to go whoop. You want to close it pretty rapidly, and then it'll slow down. Right, Dennis?
Correct.
It's amazing.
So Wadsworth has a weather forecast. So when a storm is in the area, the control's aware of it. So that way the vent can close instead of a storm moving in pretty rapidly and your roof's still open and all your customers and employees getting wet, drenched.
Yeah. So that's a good thing we're leading into, is the control aspect. And, it's funny, Patricia, because I think 90% of the greenhouses I go into have a Wadsworth control system, the old VC2000s with mercury still. And I think that's a good thing to explain to the people, because a lot of people go, hey, I want the same system, but they don't realize what has happened with the mercury.
But you don't.
You can't get it anymore. It's outlawed. So, kind of explain that aspect of where it came from, because I call that a staged opening, open half, quarter, crack and stuff like that. But now we're kind of getting into where control systems are incremental, and stuff like that, which is a lot more better temperature control. So leading into that, if you don't mind, kind of explain the control aspects of greenhouse things.
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, my father, who's 90, is kind of the grandfather of greenhouse automation. So he was an electrician and started wiring greenhouses and saw all these thermostats and different equipment. And so that's kind of how we got into the business. And so that was a long time ago, before we all had computers, in every aspect of our life. And so the drive units today work based on time. So, we would say, hey, it takes, 4 minutes to get this open, and it divides that time up. But prior to having computers, there were mercury switches. So if you have a vent and it has a little silver box that moves along with the vent, if you take that cover off, it has little mercury switches. So when that mercury hits, it tells me, oh, it's in a quarter position, it's in a half position. And it wasn't really very refined. And, it takes a certain skill set from a certain generation to set those. And and then so those are still out there. So when I first joined Wadsworth, I had to fill out these reports, like especially around coastal areas, because nobody wants mercury in the water. And I was like, why do we still sell these? Because we had internal limits. And so we stopped selling them, and it made it a lot easier. But, we have customers that still have these, but we literally are banned from selling them in most parts of the country. And so those are old. And if you have an old Wadsworth that has a knob that says crack, quarter, half, that's a pretty good sign. We can help get that upgraded. There are things that we can do without changing the whole drive unit, because it's based on time. So we kind of take that off, and we have different ways to sense when it's open and closed. If you're buying a new one, no, that's not going to happen, but you don't have to completely replace it. So that's what they are. And then another thing that my father started with his are the torque limits. So these are physical. It's a mechanical torque on the bottom. So if you've ever seen our motors, they have little springs on the bottom, a yellow or blue. And what that does is if someone forgets to set the limits, and I've seen this, with lock where it's a nice vertical vent in a Prospiant house and someone's got maybe, like a ladder or something under that, and it goes down and it's going to damage the greenhouse. It might damage the motor. And so it needs a way to shut off. And so everyone's has their different ways to shut off electrically. Ours has a mechanical way it shuts off, and it's called torquing off. So that's something that's unique to Wadsworth. But again, all the companies have their own ways of doing that. Just to protect the unit
Control
and the
systems
greenhouse.
are worth their weight in gold. That's what I always tell people. It's the best insurance policy you could possibly have. And I use the same. I tell everybody this when I'm in talks and the whole 9 yards. And this is one of my best stories I've seen and experienced and been told. Is that I have a local customer here in Cincinnati, and all their stuff was Wadsworth, and it was the old mercury switch limits and stuff like that. So their father, their dad, he was used to going through at night, flipping the switches off, turning vents off and stuff like that, going up to the thermostats and, turning everything off, higher or lower, depending on the time of year and stuff like that. Well, what happened was, as he relinquished control and gave it to his son and stuff like that, they all got tired of getting a phone call, and it would go to 5 different people, and all 5 of them would rush to the greenhouse to find out what was going on and fix the problems, to find either a vent was not opening or a vent was still stuck open or heater wasn't firing or something like that. And so they put a control system in. And so when they did this, the dad still works there, but the dad obviously, baby boomer generation and above, was so used to the individual controls and stuff like that. So they were still finding issues within the greenhouse after the control system was put in. So what they did to combat it is they ended up putting in fake dummy thermostats, and they also taped off the front of the Wadsworth boxes and the whole 9 yards, because the dad would go in and still turn everything up and down, and they thought he was changing the temperature when he really wasn't. And that was their way around it, so they didn't have to tell dad.
Controls, I love it.
Yeah, and it's hilarious that you get some of these things that people do, but they're now they're like, okay, we all get a message on our phone. We can make an adjustment without getting off a chair or something like that, or if they're at an event or something like that. And that's why I say they're worth their weight in gold. And especially with your control systems, they're attached to a weather system, and I think you guys are getting into predictive weather, where it can see it, because it's important. I mean, one of the hardest things is like, and I tell a lot of people, like, if you're putting a lot of money into a greenhouse thing, you might also put money into a generator too, because if you have a power failure, you're kind of stuck. And while that isn't going to be much, you're mostly worried about heating in the wintertime, but in the summertime, your vents are fully open and you get a storm and it knocks out the power, you have to manually close the vents if you have no power. And recently we had a customer that whole greenhouse was struck by lightning, and it knocked out the control system, and it cost them thousands of dollars in repairs to get it back open, because the system didn't sense the storm in time. And predictive weather is getting huge. It's going to be the next generation, I think, of weather control. So
yeah, it's funny, when I first joined the industry, some growers were saying, it'd be really cool is if we could know if the storm was coming in over here. And yeah, and it's so great now with the ability to tap into local area weather stations and start closing the vents. Maybe you don't close them all the way, but you get them closer. And Keith, you're absolutely right. I mean, with the extreme weather, and there's, lightning protection built into controls that didn't used to be. And, you need to make sure everything is set up properly, which is why we really like to come on site, make sure things are grounded properly, make sure your vents are timed, because we've just put in our best guess as to how long it might take. But those are all important factors with the control.
I'm going to swing back around to you on how you guys do like setup, and stuff when you do get a new system. I'm going to swing back to that question, but I'm going to go into maintenance. So somebody's they've got control systems, they've got shade systems, they've got polycarbonate, they've got motors and stuff like that. So I'm going to, what are some good maintenance items? Like Scott, like what are things that people should be doing with a polycarbonate roof, to help with its longevity? So,
well, we really just recommend using a mild liquid dish soap. It's not going to interact with the sheet. If you use something a little more aggressive, that could affect the UV coating, which in turn could potentially affect the longevity of the sheet. So really just you do see growth or anything on the outside of the sheet, mild liquid dish soap and a soft cloth should do the trick.
Yeah.
Anything stronger than that, we wouldn't recommend, just because there's that potential for something to interact with the sheet, and just no one's a fan of that, because I've seen some pretty wild stuff happen before where it just eats away the polycarbonate. It just doesn't play nice with
and that's important too. The other thing just came to mind is, let's say that you are got a new greenhouse, or you're replacing a roof or some stuff, and that polycarbonate arrives on site. What are some steps that you should follow? Because it's actually very important how you store your polycarbonate when it arrives on site. You just can't leave it out in the field.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, if you don't mind touching on that, why it's so important.
Yeah, so when we run our sheets, it comes with a protective masking. It's a heat-activated masking. So when you do get it on site, if it's not crated, definitely want to store it outside of, or keep it away from light. If it's in direct sunlight, you have the potential for that masking to become baked onto the sheet. And at that point, it's very difficult to remove it from the masking. We've, over the years, Goo Gone has been like the one remedy, I think, that would be the safest way to get that masking off. But once it's baked on, you're kind of in a tough spot. Definitely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've been there. I've taken about an hour to pull off a sheet once. It was crazy, but it also leads into another important thing. We talked earlier about 1 UV, and one side the polycarbonate's marked one way and the other one's marked to say this is the UV side, which is the important side that goes out. And I get this question all the time: is how do I know if the sheet's gone, which side's the 1 UV? And someone told me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you can use a black light, like a black light that's in a how terrible is this?
Like a UV light or something.
Yeah, like a flashlight. You can use like a UV flashlight, and you can actually tell by using the UV flashlight to tell which is the UV side.
Yeah, if you've taken the masking off, that is one way. Like the side with the UV will kind of have a purplish glow to it. It will look different than the side that's not UV protected. Usually, what we'll recommend, obviously, if you've taken the masking off, it's a little difficult. But if the masking is still on, one trick is to mark. You can make a small mark on the one side that does have the UV. You can leave the masking on until it's fully installed and then taking it off. That's what we recommend doing. That's like the foolproof method of knowing which side has the UV.
Yeah.
Make sure the branded masking is facing upwards towards the sun, and you'll be good to go. No premature yellowing there.
Yeah, and that's all. I mean, all good tips. I mean, especially when you're doing a recover and stuff like that, because you can always tell when somebody puts a piece of polycarbonate upside down. It's horrible, but you can always tell.
There's just one sheet that's more yellow than the rest. Like
more yellow than the rest. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a dead giveaway, and people always ask, well, what's going on? Did I do something wrong? I'm like, well, I think you put it upside down. But it's
99% of the time. Yeah,
99%. And then Dennis, the other aspect we haven't talked about is rack and pinions. A lot of people, every greenhouse has rack and pinions, driving their vents and stuff like that. And I get this question all the time: what's the proper way to lube them?
Follow the instructions that come with the rack and pinions, and make sure you do not put grease on the gear part of the rack itself, because that creates more problems, more headaches. It acts like sandpaper, just wears the pinions down. And on the bearing plates, which are the shaft hangers, make sure you just put a little bit around on each side with a small brush. Don't use a large brush, but a very small. Make sure you use the right grease.
Yeah. Nothing that attracts dust. That's
right, and you don't want something that's going to cause problems if you're growing vegetables in the greenhouse.
Absolutely.
So everything we use is vegetable friendly, is the way we would say it.
Yes. Yeah, it's not as easy as putting WD-40. I know a lot of people have squeaky racks and pinions, but WD-40 is not your friend. It tracks so much dust, and you can actually wear the teeth out a lot faster, which is important too, because it all follows into those limit switches that we were talking about earlier. If you don't have your vents completely set, you can prematurely wear any rack and pinion down, for that matter. So
pretty much every 6 months, just check the racks, make sure they line correctly and they're not at an angle, because when they're at an angle, it's causing more torque on the motor itself, and you can hear them in a bind. And then generally same thing with shade with a push-pull system. Make sure all your racks are aligned correctly with the push-pull system, because otherwise that can cause problems, and then you have a big headache.
Yeah, I mean, with shade systems especially, I mean, if they get out of line, you will be paying the ultimate price. And that's then my next question is, what kind of maintenance do you have on shade systems and heat retention systems? Patricia?
So just the same as Dennis was saying, I think just at least once a year, if not twice, to a visual inspection. You want to make sure that your lead edge is straight, that everything is lined up, that things are tucked around the lead edge tube, so the fabric is coming around. A lot of times you'll come in and it's kind of like come untucked because of the installation or whatever, or it's dragging. You want to check your perimeter seals. I like to make sure there's not debris on there, especially with roof vents or the open roof. So try to get that off. And Ludwig Svensson, again, has really good instructions on what to and not to do to clean their fabric. And, they're kind of an industry leader, and so they do a really nice job. So I would encourage people to visit their website. For us, we're more on the mechanical side. So the drive unit, you're fine. But anytime, I think we've all been in greenhouses and heard the squeak, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. And I always said that is a cry for help. And let's work on getting that aligned. Now, the fabric itself, it's gotten more high tech. And I use the analogy, I'm a cyclist. So, I've got my steel bike, my gravel bike, it's really tough. And then I've got my road bike that's very light. So the fabric has gotten, in my opinion, a little bit lighter and more delicate because it's more high tech. It's diffusing light and it's going into these very small bundles. You have to keep in mind most of these cloth manufacturers are European, and they are further north. They don't have as long of days, and so they want a really, really tight bundle, and they're very concerned about what's in the top of their greenhouses. And so those lighter fabrics, it used to be, that was my first job working at Wadsworth, was putting the hooks in the fabric, and it was really heavy. It was almost like a denim. And now, it's extremely high tech. It's amazing. It's super cool. It diffuses light, it reflects it back up, does all these things, but it doesn't last for, as long as you're a pair of Levi's, right? And so, you want to look at the fabric, because as it starts to wear, you're not getting as good of heat retention. And you want to plan for that. It's a significant project because usually you need to kind of clear the greenhouse out and get up there. So you want to plan ahead for that. So you kind of want to keep an eye on that and know that that is coming up. And sometimes, again, depending on where you are, there could be grant money to do that replacement because it's a known cost savings for energy consumption.
Yeah.
And the other thing is make sure you don't leave your tools sitting on top of the screens.
Yeah. That really makes the fabric cranky, doesn't it?
Yeah. Any tool sitting out always making buddy cranky. No, all good tips. Every person owns a greenhouse. Maintenance is huge. My background is maintenance and stuff like that. I used to do maintenance in greenhouses when I was a grower, and every year it's very important. It's just as much as changing the oil in your car, or working on your power equipment. Maintenance.
Keith, I should say one thing.
Yeah,
so there's two choices when you're putting up a curtain system. So we tend to use the stainless steel soap drawn. And that is kind of a one and done. You put it up and it's there forever. The monofilament, which is quite popular and understandably so, it's less expensive, that most of the manufacturers, if I'm not mistaken, want you to replace those monofilament lines every time you replace the fabric. And so when you look at the cost of a system, the first cost of a Wadsworth is more because you're buying something that's going to last the lifetime of that greenhouse, probably. When you look at the monofilament, and we can provide either or, but I would say about probably 90% of our projects use that. And so that's a factor too when you're thinking about the maintenance. Because what happens with the monofilament is it has UV protection, but it can splinter over time. And so the splintering causes drag on the fabric, which is why the fabric manufacturers want you to replace it. Does that sound about right to you, Dennis?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is one of the things I tend to do with all our guests on the show for our last few minutes and stuff like that. And I tend to pose this question, same question to everybody, and that is that you have an unlimited budget and you have about an acre of greenhouse that you're going to build. What would you build? What would you put in it, and why? So it's sky's the limit. And so I'm going to ask each of you, like, what would you do? Like, what type of greenhouse? What controls? What ventilation? What would you do? What would you do? Because a lot of people out there, they're kind of, they're in between, like, what am I supposed to do here and stuff like that. So I always like to get everybody's opinion, and it's kind of playful in a way, stuff like that. So Scott, what kind of greenhouse would you build for an acre with unlimited budget? What would you do and why?
What would I do? I would probably give you guys a call first and steer me in the right direction. But well, in North Carolina, I mean, we're tobacco country, so maybe I would do a little tobacco farm or something like that. And then I don't know. Ask you all the questions for control. Ask Dennis. What kind of gears or machines do I need to get this thing running?
And of course, you're going to cover it with polycarbonate, correct?
I'd probably do a little white on the end walls, and maybe some polycoolite for a little temperature reduction inside, so it's not so hot in there during the North Carolina summers, falls, and it's just hot all the time here now. We don't really have a winter or fall, so right. It's just it's summer and less than summer. So yeah.
Dennis, what would you do and why?
I would call you, Keith, because you said I have an unlimited budget, so I'll let you design it, and I'll just write the check.
Blank check time.
Yeah, blank check. But I would definitely want a Fenlon, and I would grow vegetables.
Nice. And what would you grow and why?
Vegetables?
Yeah. Because this is an important question. I mean,
no, but the reason is because I think there's going to be a shortage of vegetables. And especially with a lot of the stuff that's grown in the field, you have no idea what chemicals are sprayed on them.
Yeah, and it's important. I mean, this is one thing I tell people with we get this call all the time. I want to grow vegetables and stuff like that. And you remember one of our past colleagues, John Hogeboom. John was always the type that said, "Don't ever do a salad bar," and you'll never be profitable. And as we've heard in the news lately, a couple of the growers out there have gone under and stuff like that, and they've had issues with diseases and stuff like that. But John always used to tell us, like, you're going to have to do so many acres of tomatoes, so many acres of peppers, so many acres of lettuce and stuff to be profitable. And this is what you do. We always used to follow that adagio with him and stuff like that. And he was supposed to be, he was the guru, and so vegetables, you're right. We're going to run out of vegetables.
But I would say microgreens, because I think people are eating more healthier today than what they did a few years ago.
Yeah.
I think people are more concerned about buying product that is locally grown, that hasn't been sitting on a truck for 5 days crossing the country. And you're supporting the local market.
Yeah. I think produce is the next gen for sure. I really feel like we're going to see an uptick in that in the next couple of years, and it's going to.
And I think up in Colorado, around Boulder, Denver, that you've seen a lot more growers growing produce locally than what you have 5-10 years ago.
True.
Same thing in Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma City. A lot of the smaller growers have a specialty crop, just growing 1 or 2. And Keith, you know the customers we're talking about, and Patricia, you know the customer we're talking about up in Tulsa.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, Patricia, what would you do and why?
Well, anyone that knows me knows I'm like obsessed with salad and herbs. On my desk, which I'm not at right now, I have a whole herb garden. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, a cat, like smelling the basil, smelling the lemon verbena and the rosemary, everything. And so I would probably do herbs and leafy greens. And I love the atrium house. I live in Colorado, tons of amazing sunshine. But I was just at Brown University, and they were showing me, their experiments they're doing with LED lights, and I'm a technology, so I would have to have lights, dimmable lights for sure, even though we've got lots of light there. No budget. So what do you think, Dennis? 2-3 layer curtain?
Yeah, why not?
And, I might do, some hydroponics. We work a lot with H.E. Anderson, and their fertigation and DRAM. So yeah, I mean, there's so many cool technologies. So I would probably geek out on that and then be in there like rolling in the basil or something.
But remember, when you grow produce, 1% loss light is 1% loss of product.
Yeah, and it's getting dark around 4:30. Our sun disappears behind the mountains. So
Yeah.
And I need a blackout curtain because nobody wants, me broadcasting light around the city.
Out of your office right now. So,
From your desk.
yeah.
That's right.
We'll make sure we get you a little LED light.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. We'll put the blackout cloth on your window so that nobody calls it in. So Q&A time. We've actually got a couple questions that came up, and then Janine will pop in if there's anything that I missed. But the first one came up. It says, I need major renovations to my 30-year-old greenhouse, including rebuilding vent walls, new poly for roof and sidewalls. In Denver Metro, municipal greenhouse, having trouble finding anyone to do work. Any recommendations? I'll kind of start this off. It's important, a couple of things. One, find out who manufactured the greenhouse. It's not easy to fix other people's greenhouses when you're competitors. But a lot of the main things, as far as like polycarbonate, it's pretty standard. Scott handles many different companies at the same time. And then, Patricia and Dennis, their motors are every greenhouse. So a lot of those can be done. So I would say, one of the important thing is find out who it is, contact some, some greenhouse. If you find out who the greenhouse manufacturer is, see if you can reach out to them and see if there's anybody in their area that they recommend that could come out to be, a builder or a maintenance person and stuff like that. It's becoming tough. Yes, I get it. It's getting tougher to find people that, want to do maintenance and work on greenhouses, but that's the first step, is to identify what you have and, talk to the manufacturer and find out who they recommend to come out and service it. It's huge. And then they can use, if it's something like polycarbonate, they'll reach out to Scott, for quotes on polycarbonate to get new glazing and stuff done. So that's very important. The next question is, and I think this is going to be for you, Patricia. It says, here are a couple seed questions. How is AI playing into the environmental controllers and their capabilities?
Oh, that's a very fun one. So yeah, that's a big one. How much time do we have?
Go for it. Yeah, plenty of time.
So what we're doing is we're launching our new controlled juniper in January. And so this is a super cool control. So it's very introductory. But the idea with this control is that it's very simple to use, but as the grower, as their knowledge and needs change, they can add to the control. And they can go from like it just being super simple, like, hey, I want it to be 68 degrees in here and my unit heaters and this and this. And then all of a sudden they're adding these other things. So that's the control, because it's our newest product line where we're going to start introducing AI. And we'll start with simple recommendations, and it's basically doing the things that my team's done all along. We've always looked at the logs, the graphs, the data. Hey, it looks like this equipment's cycling a lot. What is your goal? Are you trying to hold a really precise temperature? Are you more concerned about your energy consumption? And so we'll have different parameters and we'll let AI do it. I am a huge fan of AI. I use it literally every day. So,
well,
and I also see it working with our, with our tech support and, getting, better, faster answers.
Yeah, talking about that, make sure that your vents aren't like a bird, opening, closing constantly, because you're going to wear out your racking pinions, especially like on an atrium house. Make sure
it's
there's a delay.
Very important, because I've seen greenhouses so tight that you're constantly they're doing that. They're just constantly fluttering and stuff like that, and you see the motors burn out, and they wonder why. It's because you got to let them rest for a few minutes.
I remember when I first joined the industry, and one of our beloved competitors sent out a newsletter saying basically, hey, don't set your controls so tight that it wears out the rack and pinion, because you'll see it. it's just that area. And it's unnecessary. It's cycling. And so you don't want to be like so hyper responsive. But I do think AI will help people because, I always tell our programmers, I'm like, these are plant people. They are not computer programmers. And
Right.
we've always just tried to make things simple and as clean and approachable as possible.
Right. And in a plant, it's not instantaneous for its adjustment to air temperature, water, and stuff like that. It takes a period of time for it to adjust. And so, I mean, some crops are hyper temperature sensitive, like poinsettias or mums or something like that. Yes, but you don't need that much so tight of control, like where you're making changes every 30 seconds to a minute. You mean some of these things you can go at 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and you're going to be fine.
Most plants, as long as you're not too hot or too cold, they're looking at the average daily temperature, the average daily light. So
yes, yeah. And it's important, like the AI, what I'm seeing and stuff like that. I was sitting in a board meeting at Ohio State a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that they're studying up there, and I just saw it on one of they call it eGrow. It's through Ohio State and a couple other universities that are a part of this. But they're working on drones, unpiloted drones that actually sit in the greenhouse, and at night they'll fly around on a predetermined path, and they'll look at the heaters, they'll look at the shade cloth, they'll look at the vents, they'll look at the motors, they'll look at everything, and they're constantly scanning for changes. So if, like, say, a heater, for example, has a hot spot where it might have a cracked exchanger, it'll immediately send a notification to the grower or to the owner and say, anomaly detected, crack in heat exchanger number 3, or hey, this curtain didn't close all the way, you might adjust your limits, or the vent is power failure, on this thing. It's crazy. They just did a test on it. It's going to be the future, and stuff like that. And these things are like the size of your fist. I mean, that's how big they are, flying around with the camera. And I asked, I said, is the FAA got to be involved? And they said no, because it's unpiloted. So, I mean, with these initial tests, AI, essentially what this is going, it could give so much feedback to a control system, or on the fly. It's almost limiting how much people are, what involvement they're going to have. You're basically going to be telling them, hey, I'm growing poinsettias, and it's going to take over. So
I don't think anyone's jobs at risk.
Nobody wants to go that far yet. That would be kind of interesting to see what an AI would grow a poinsettia compared to a human, but that would be kind of funny. Let's see. Another question. Where are we at with sustainability and coverings for greenhouses? What should growers be aware of? That's a good question. Scott, you got any thoughts?
Well, as far as our product, we do use regrind in our materials. So if you're looking for like sustainability, I can't give you the exact number, but every sheet that we do produce has some regrinded material within it. So we're trying to be as sustainable as possible, limiting the scrap of our sheet when we're cutting from stock or producing it. So we're not like LEED certified or anything like that, but we're always trying to be more sustainable where we can with the product, with all the regulations going on. I know, California with the LEED stuff, we're just trying to be as sustainable as we can.
Nice. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see. Can you tell us a little bit about the new Juniper controller and what kind of AI will be involved with it?
Probably not just yet.
Okay. Yeah. That's a little proprietary.
I get in trouble from the engineers when I start.
Yeah. I don't want to get you in trouble.
But I think it would be sort of making recommendations on, adjusting. So if we're seeing cycling, it would help you adjust the equipment so that you're, depending again on your goal. So kind of recommendations.
Yeah, and that system, I think you guys are planning like first quarter of 25, I think, or something like that.
That's right. And the AI won't be in it initially, but yeah.
So
I'm excited.
We will see a taste by Cultivate, right?
Absolutely.
Somebody asked, what is a good example of setting vents? I think what they're trying to ask is, what is a good position for vents to be open? As far as
like how far?
Yeah, how far
from the roof ridge line? I like to call your engineers and ask them.
I always say it's like 25 degrees of straight. So you don't want to go as we've all talked about this and everything, and Dennis was mentioning this too, is you don't want to go so far that you pull the rack out of the system. I've seen greenhouses where they're like half an inch left at the end of the rack, and that's way, either you don't have the right size rack in there, or you're trying to get so much airflow that, you're extending the rack to, past its capabilities. And you got to be careful with that, because technically speaking, when they build the greenhouses, that when the hinge goes in, the hinge might have to go to a certain level when they put the hinge in to lock it down, so that when it only goes so far, it can't pull out, because you don't want to do it. But if you go too far, you could pull it. The wind's just going to pull it straight out of the hinge and stuff like that. So you got to, 15 to 25 degrees is what I usually tell people and stuff like that. I see people that try to go all the way maximum open, unless you have an open roof. If you just got a hinge vent, you want to make sure it's plenty of airflow, because one of the things I always tell, I think the misconception is that your vent is pulling air in, but it's technically a stovepipe at that point, because physics, heat rises. So heat is going to be pumped out of the top. We want to pull the cool air in from the sides. And so, really all you're doing is how much you're allowing that to vent, which is what it's supposed to be doing, to get rid of the heat in the summertime. So,
Keith, one quick plug in. We talked about maintenance. If you have roof vents, no matter whose control, you should have some type of weather protection. So some type of weather station that can tell your vent. And you should check those sensors to make sure that they're operational, because sometimes, birds like to perch up there. It's a lot of weather. So that's definitely a maintenance checklist item for us, is check your wind speed, in particular, wind direction, precipitation, all those sensors. And if you don't have that, then reach out to your control manufacturer and get something.
Yeah, and I'm going to put another one. Prospiant also recommends stops on the racks. I would not believe how many greenhouses I walk into, and the first thing when I look up and I see no stops, I tell them, you guys should really look into putting some kind of form of a stop on the end of your rack. And lo and behold, give it a week or two later, we'll have a storm, and all of a sudden they're calling for repair parts because the roof vent collapsed or pulled out of itself. And what I mean by that is, at the end of your rack, you should have some kind of bolt, U-bolt, something that will prevent that rack from going through the bottom of that pinion. And we usually tell people at the beginning and the end of the vent and on either side of the motor. That is the safest way. I've seen people go crazy and put it on every single one. It's not really necessary, but if you feel that insurance to you is good, do it. But I see a lot of older greenhouses that just are not they don't have the racks. And wind is not your friend. It will pull that vent open. It will fold that vent back. It will happen when you don't least expect it. So, that's one of the things that you can definitely.
Keith, and also make sure you put your weather station in the right location on the greenhouse.
Very
important.
Yeah.
Because if you have a tree there and it's blocking the wind, it's not helping you at all.
Yeah. It's true.
And that came from Amanda on LinkedIn.
That's right.
Yeah. Janine, do we have any more questions that come in, or are we doing pretty good? Or
We're doing pretty good. That is all that we have that came in, so we should be good.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap up this Deer Grower series. Guys, thank you very much for joining me today. It has been great to talk to you all. And for those of us that are out there, have a great Thanksgiving that are there in the U.S. And we'll see you in January for the next series. And with that, thank you guys, and have a great day.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.